Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Authors Love Bookstores presented by A Mighty Blaze. My name is Kimberly Hensel-Lorance, and I am your host today. I produce and create this show in partnership with fellow writer Joe Moldover, and we're so glad that you're here today. I'd like to say a few words about the state of our world before we begin. Here at A Mighty Blaze, we're well aware that our international community is facing an enormous crisis in Ukraine, and our thoughts are with the 2 million plus people who have escaped the invasion, finding safety in other countries, as well as all of those who remain still in the country. In these times of turmoil and trouble and strife, stories and connection are more important than ever before. They provide us with solace and they remind us of our shared humanity. So we are especially grateful to be able to bring this conversation to you today. Thank you for being here. Okay. Now, to our wonderful guests. This is our 88th episode of Authors Love Bookstores. We've been putting together this show since March of, Mighty Blaze has been together since March of 2020, and our show debuted in April of 2020. So we are excited every week to bring you wonderful conversations between authors and booksellers. And today I'm very pleased to welcome author Heather Webb and bookseller Annie Philbrick to the show. Welcome, welcome. So let me tell you a little bit about Annie and Heather. Heather Webb is a USA Today best-selling and award-winning author of 7 historical novels. Already I'm blushing. Her latest book is called The Next Ship Home, and it's just out. And I have to say, I read this. Heather's going to hold it up. And this is one of those books I stayed up way past midnight to read, which is like, I don't do that. And
that's my favorite thing to hear.
I do it, but I only do it when it's good. Like I had to see how it ended. Like, oh, it's so good. Her books have received so many accolades. Her 2015 novel, Rodin's Lover, was a Goodreads top pick. Last Christmas in Paris won the Women's Fiction Writers Association Star Award. Meet Me in Monaco was selected as a finalist for the 2020 Goldsboro R&A Award, as well as the 2019 Digital Book World Fiction Prize. Heather, do you choose these books based on places you want to go to? Paris?
I get asked that actually. No, but I used to be a high school French teacher. So France for me was sort of a natural backdrop. I'm sort of branching out as I go, but yeah. Excellent. But I would like to go back to France, obviously.
So your books have been translated into more than 16 languages. You're also an editor, public speaker, and a cookbook addict, I understand.
Yeah. Yes, I am. Yes.
If you put it in your bio, I will find it. Annie Philbrick is the owner of 3 independent bookstores, the Bank Square Books in Mystic, Connecticut, Title IX in New London, Connecticut, and the Savoy Bookshop and Cafe in Westerly, Rhode Island. For those of you who join us every week, Annie may be familiar. She was on our show last June in conversation with Donna Freitas, and we're going to put the link to that show below. So in case you're done with the conversation today and you think, I want more Annie, you can follow that link. That conversation. She was on then talking about Savoy. So today we're going to focus a little bit more on Bank Square. In addition to being a bookseller, Annie is the chair of the board of the Book Industry Charitable Foundation. She's also served on the board of the American Booksellers Association, where she chaired the ABA's Indies Introduced program, which highlights debut authors. She's also been a judge for a number of literary prizes, very prestigious ones, including the National Book Award and the Kirkus Prize for Fiction. And we are thrilled to have you both here today. Thank you.
And I also love cookbooks, Heather, so that we have that in common. I don't know if I go as far as saying I'm an addict, but I'm really close.
What's the cookbook in your, this is an unexpected question, but what's the cookbook in your kitchen that's the most dog-eared? And
The Silver Palette is probably completely falling apart.
Yeah.
But
the 6 Seasons of Vegetables.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
It's what's his name? I wish I could recall it right off the top of my head, but it's a fantastic cookbook. He does really interesting things with vegetables that are in season based on New England seasons, and there's some really sort of gourmet but easy to make beautiful dishes. So I highly recommend
that. I got an early copy of Eric Kim's Korean American yesterday, New York Times writer, and that is that's sitting on my kitchen table right now. Just I read them. I don't.
I do
read
too.
them. Yeah,
I love all the anecdotes and the pictures. Yeah, it's so fun. You're a foodie like me.
You betcha.
Do you go, I'm going to get off this tangent in a second, but I'm just curious, do you go to your cookbook first or do you Google a recipe first?
Depends on my mood, actually.
Yeah, it depends on the mood. And I've really gone down the rabbit hole with the New York Times app during COVID, when cooking was for everybody was just becoming such a chore for the same person you saw every single day. So
yeah. Oh my gosh.
Go out for dinner. But yeah, I'll do a little, like I'll do a little both.
I just, when you're cooking for a family, it gets really, it kind of depends. Like, am I in a hurry? Am I just over it and I'm just putting food on the table? Or is it one of those nights of the week where I'm like, I'm tired of everything. I'm going to bust out this cookbook and find something new.
Right.
So.
Yeah. My kids are all adults and gone. Well, hopefully they're all adults, but they're all out of the house. So it's just my husband and I. So he'll basically eat anything I make. So it's pretty easy.
I see the links to the cookbooks you're mentioning are below. You can buy them from Bank Square. So
cool. Thanks.
Oh, yes.
So I discovered right before we came out onto the internet, before we went live, that the two of you have never met. You know of one another, but you've never met. So this is your first introduction. But Heather, you were saying that you come to Bank Square all the time. I think you said I've been there a million times. Can you tell us about the bookstore, your connection to it, why you find it so special?
I love Mystic, the town where it is. I love the ocean is my spirit animal. And so as often as I can be on the shore, I get down there as much as possible. And Mystic is not that far from me, and it's quaint, and there's wonderful food. And then this bookstore opened, Annie, probably 10 years ago.
Our bookstore?
Or is it older than that?
No, Bank Square's been there since like 1988.
Okay, so I only noticed it about 10 years ago.
Well, I think that may have been like after they did the streetscape, and now there's like that little park in front of it. But I bought it in 2006. Okay. But it's been there. I mean, it's transformed in terms of its shape. But.
Right. Well, and I wasn't really in the writing world until about 12 years ago, so it makes sense that I would kind of come on it later.
Yeah.
But I stepped inside, and it's deceptively, it's larger than it looks. You know, you walk into the first room, and you think it's going to be this little tiny store, but then you walk around the corner and there's a whole other wing that's nonfiction. And there's the best stationery ever. I buy all my stationery. Yep. They're the thank you cards. There's so many of those things that go out as an author. And of course I buy books when I'm there, the beautiful displays, and they're just friendly. It's always been a great place to do events. I feel like they do a nice job advertising and bringing people in and doing a really large variety of events. I've done something at a casino with a red carpet. I've done I've done a luncheon. I've done just in conversation, small events too. I mean, it's a wonderful store. So
yeah. So the store originally it was built in 1947, and originally it was a gas station on the corner. So when you walk into that main door by the whale, that sort of was the old gas station. And then that part of the store got flooded during Sandy, and we were closed for like 3 weeks. And then after that, the store next door, their buildings were all owned by the same family. And so the building next door, which connected through that opening, which is basically we took the fire door off, was empty after Sandy for a variety of reasons. And so in 2013, we expanded into there, which also gained us an upstairs.
Yeah.
We used to do events up there, and then we realized it's not ADA compliant really. So we stopped doing that. We moved all the offices upstairs. So it's probably total square footage is probably 4,500 of retail and probably 6,000 of total square footage with all the offices upstairs.
Oh, that's pretty big.
Yeah, it's big.
Yeah, it's a nice size.
So when we expanded, people would go in because there's 2 entrances on Main Street now. And so one person would go in one door, and then they'd leave and they go in the other door, and they'd be like, so how did you let somebody like open a bookstore right next to you? And being like, it's all the same store. But we've gotten better on signage, so it makes more sense. But initially it was like, it looks like two different stores right on Main Street.
Annie, I read that you came to Bank Square, or it became part of your life because your son worked there. Was that
Have you heard that story? Yeah.
Can you tell us
Yeah, so
about how you came to the store?
Yeah, he's a very cerebral person, very big reader. Always wanted to work there since he was like 8. And so he finally got a job there in the summers. And then he was back, I think it was during, before he went to college, or he was in, I can't remember, somewhere in 2005. I guess he was still in high school. He was working there at Christmas. And he came home one day and said, Mom, I think Stuart's going to sell the store, because his wife had taken early retirement from the seaport and had got a job at the Getty Museum in LA.
Oh, wow.
And at the current time, I was working at the Small Business Development Center at UConn in Avery Point, which honestly was just really boring. I don't fit into this bureaucracy of this huge university. It just doesn't work for me. And so I thought, oh, that would be kind of interesting to do. It was always my bookstore. I read a lot. I had run small businesses before. And so when I went to pick up my check, or David's check in January, I said to Stuart, the owner, I said, if you're going to sell this, I may be interested. And he goes, yeah, I'm going to sell it. Do you want to buy it? And I'm like, oh God. So it's like,
On the spot.
yeah. So actually 6 months later, 3 women bought it. So there were 2 other women with me who we were friends, but not really close friends. I mean, we knew each other through our kids. And one of them pretty quickly went back to teaching. Retail wasn't her gig. And then my other partner stayed until about 5 years ago. She's older than I am. And so she retired like 5 years ago. So it's me now, but yeah. So yes, but the funny part of that story about my son is that when I was telling him that we were going to buy this store, he looks at me very seriously and he goes, Mom, that business, is very complicated. It's much more than just selling books. But he said, but I think you can do it. He was like 16 or something. And I'm like, oh, thank you. So here we are, 16 years later, we're still there.
It does sound like a teenage boy.
It does. It
He's
does.
32 now, but it was, 16 years.
Mom, you don't have a clue what you're getting into, but I think I might give you the stamp of approval.
Right. So he was sweet.
I'm really curious. You've been doing this now for 15, 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to meet yourself back then when you were buying the store, what would you tell yourself?
Be careful how you answer, Annie.
No, it's just,
I'm thinking about it, Heather.
so much has changed in 16 years, right? So much has changed in the world.
So much has really changed. Yeah, I think some, and this kind of combines people who come to me and say, wow, I would love to work in a bookstore. It's just seems so great. And it is really great. But I think I think my son was right. It is a lot of work. I mean, the book selling world is a little bit of a quirky world. I have a bookkeeper who's been with me for a few years and comes from a very different background and says, I've never, ever worked in a business like the book business. It's just quirky. And so I think I just to remind myself that it is a lot of work, but on the other hand, it's a lot of fun, and to not be afraid to say yes to new opportunities. We wouldn't have Savoy if I hadn't said yes when I was offered that opportunity. So you're taking risks. And I do remember I was on one conversation with the ABA. They were doing some panel, or I can't remember exactly what it was. And it was about opening bookstores. And there was a gentleman on there from SCORE, which is the organization of retired executives to help people open up businesses. And I sort of told the story about how we bought the bookstore I didn't know how to run a bookstore. None of us knew how to run a bookstore. And he was just couldn't fathom the fact that somebody would buy a bookstore who had no idea about running a bookstore. And he said that. He said, that is just incredibly risky. Why would you buy a bookstore if you don't know? I mean, I don't know anybody who would do that. And there was just sort of this pregnant pause. And I just said to him, I said, well, we're still here. And that was sort of the end of the conversation. It was like, but I hope that answers your question. I think that it's a lot of work. It's a lot of fun, but don't be, not to be too realize that you may need to take risks. In the last 6 years, we've been through a lot in terms of, the recession, to Amazon, to flooding, to the ebooks, to now through COVID with supply chain issues and, borders closing and all of it. And, you kind of got to roll with the punches and still, like my general manager, Kelsey, said to me when we were getting, in the darkness of COVID, she said, look, if we got through hurricane or tropical storm Sandy and got flooded, we can certainly get through this, so it's perseverance. But it's also really important that it's still fun. And it's, it's a great thing to do. And people ask me why I bought it. And, it's to be part of the community. And we're a huge part of the community. We're sort of the cornerstone of Downtown Mystic. And that's really important to me, personally, and also from a business standpoint to, give back to the community.
And you get to discover wonderful new books like Heather's, which she's going to hold up now. Excellent.
And I didn't mean to match the cover as we discussed, but in fact, I do.
I love that.
That looks great, Heather. I love it.
Branding. It's good branding. The reviews are really great, Heather. Let's see, what have they been saying? This book, I read a review that called The Next Ship Home the epitome of historical fiction, which I thought was great. Compelling, engaging, superb use of detail, meticulous research and deft prose. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful feedback about the book.
A lot of really beautiful things. I got to tell you, the first few always make you kind of choked up because you feel like this thing that I have nurtured and seen grow and love for a while, other people are connecting to that, and that's always great. And it's not going to connect with everyone, but that's the nature of art, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But it's been really great to see people really loving the book. It makes me so happy. So
congratulations.
I also have to say a quick hi. There's several of my favorite readers out there who've popped in, Minnie and Sue and Sharon. Hi, ladies. Thanks for coming.
Thank you to everyone who's watching today. We appreciate that. And you have a lot of fans because this is your 7th book. Your 7th book. I just want to say that again. And all historical fiction. So tell us a little bit about this book. Because I have a little description, but I don't want to. I'm always afraid to say what the description is, so I don't want to reveal too much as the reader. I want to hear from the author. Describe the book first, and please tell us where this idea came from and how you decided to write about this time in American history.
Well, so the first time I went to Ellis Island, I was a high school teacher. And I was so incredible. I was a chaperone. It wasn't even my trip. And I just went along with this other group. And I did take a lot of trips. I took kids to France, believe it or not. Some parents entrusted a 25-year-old to take their 30 children abroad. Which
what we used to do. I don't know how they're still alive.
No, and I did it 3 times. So I was a chaperone on this trip, and I was so bowled over by the presence of this building. And it just, the halls echo with the people that have been there before. And it struck me and it stayed with me. And years later, this was before I was even a writer. Years later, I was thinking about the next thing I was going to work on. And this was after my first book, and I knew I wanted to write a book set at Ellis Island, but I also knew in the back of my mind somehow that I wasn't ready. I just kind of shelved it. And a lot of authors do this. If you talk to them about this, we have a lot of ideas, but it's like they don't fully present themselves until it's time. It's just sort of like a ghost in the back of your mind. And when Hamilton became big, and I headed back to New York City and went and saw it, and just this major questioning of who America is, what we stand for, who we're made of, just kind of galvanized me to start thinking about that book again. And I headed back to Ellis Island, and I was just like, this is it. I am ready to go. Let's do this. So I ordered 1 million books. I spent a lot of time at the island on a first name basis with the librarian there, who's wonderful. He knows everything about every country and every person, every immigrant group coming through there was incredible. And yeah, and so I decided I needed obviously an immigrant protagonist, but I also wanted someone who worked at Ellis Island so that you got two really different viewpoints. They're both women. The worker is a matron who has an affinity for languages. Her parents own a beer hall in the tenement neighborhood. And they need to save money because they're ready to get out of that area of the city and move uptown to Yorkville. And so off she goes against her wishes. And they meet, and suddenly the things happening at Ellis Island aren't exactly what they expected, and things don't go according to plan. And so they become friends and sort of face down the corruption that's happening there.
Yeah.
So that's the book.
There's a statistic in your author's note that I found fascinating, and I'm sure I learned this when I went to Ellis Island as a child, but 50% of Americans can trace an ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 45%. Yeah. It's a huge percentage. And if you're looking at our population, it's around 400 million or so.
Yeah.
That is a huge number of people. I mean, what is that? 170 or something like that? 170 million people that can trace an ancestor. I mean, that's intense. And I was blown away by the fact that there's so few books, fiction, actually about Ellis Island itself. You know, there's a lot of scenes. I researched ad nauseum too in the fiction market, looking to see, what's out there. And even a trilogy that was called the Ellis Island trilogy literally has one scene of the immigrant passing through it, and the rest of the trilogy has nothing to do with Ellis Island, which I found odd. But yeah, the only other book out there is Susan Meisner's Fall of Marigolds, which is wonderful. And it's also dual timeline, and it's about other things too. So I thought, I'm going to dig in. I'm going to show all the sides, everything going on here. And when I found the story in the New York Times archives about 40 people being hauled before the grand jury court in New York for the way they were treating immigrants, I knew I was onto something. And that was kind of the backbone of the story. So
I think that's a really interesting point. When I read historical fiction, I always like the books that can find a connection to the current day, that can teach me something about the past, but also make me understand how it links to today. And I felt that you did that exceptionally well. That we're talking about, the book takes place in like 1902, and I have the time right, early 1900s, and we're talking about the sort of the way the different groups treat one another so negatively. The Germans are with the Germans, the Italians are with the Italians. They do not mix. They do not think well of one another. And generally, everyone feels really poorly about immigrants. I mean, not making a lot of generalizations, but we can see that.
Absolutely.
Coming all the way into 2022, we talk about immigration, we talk about refugees. And so it's like, I found that part of the book really compelling, that we can find the origins of today in the past.
I'm so glad. Some of those headlines to me were shocking. I mean, I created fictional articles. There are 5 or 6 of them that sort of frame the story. And but I based them all on real headlines. And some of those headlines, I just thought, this absolutely could have come out today. And so, yeah, I was struck by that. And I thought, this is so relevant. There's a story here that needs to be told for sure.
How do you go about researching your books and balancing? I mean, there must be so much information that you came across that was interesting, that was engaging, that you wanted to include, and yet you had to make these very, very careful choices so that we as a reader are immersed in the time period but not overwhelmed by detail. How do you make those decisions as a writer?
Yeah, I think you get better at it. When you first start out as a hisfic writer, I mean, you just go nuts. You could spend years researching one thing, and then, the story itself is burdened by the facts instead of the character sort of shining through and the emotional journey shining through. So I think you do get better with practice. And I've learned to sort of front load, where I will research for a month or two and work on just character maps and kind of outlining historical outline, maybe a bit of a story outline in the form of a synopsis. And then once I feel like I've got that first line of the story floating around in my head, I know I'm ready to sit down and start going. And so I will. And a lot of stuff pops up while I'm actually writing that first draft. Like something I'll have to stop and research, but I try really hard not to do that too much in the first draft. Now I leave parentheses with the note and just keep going to get the draft down. I have found one of the things I learned is you could spend 3 hours learning about the train tables in 1880s Paris. And then you cut that whole scene and you spent like half a day on it and you're just kind of gutted that you wasted all of that time. So I try to keep it as sort of logical and quick as possible, really.
So Heather, you used a word, excuse me first, that I've never, it's called histic. Hisfic. So that's short for historical fiction.
Yeah, that's what we call it. We call it hisfic.
It's funny. In all the years that I read a lot of historical fiction because I love it, because just like you say, Kimberly, I love learning something, while reading a fiction book. And I totally understand it's fiction, but it's also based like on a story, like your book, Heather. But it's just I've never heard hisfic, but I like that. I like that a lot.
It's like rom-coms, there's
no, I know, I totally get it. I've never heard it before. So I heard that and I was like, I'm just gonna check on that.
I love that you said something about learning too. I think as a former, and I keep saying former teacher, but I'm actually an adjunct at Drexel University. So I'm still a teacher, but as a teacher at heart, I really like to sort of give the reader this information somehow in a fun way to learn, in an interesting way to learn. And I find that, I work hard at weaving in the stuff that I find fascinating, that I think they absolutely have to know that has to go in the book. And I know not all historical fiction is written that way. Some of it is sort of more of the character journey than it is the actual sort of backdrop and the facts, but I love both. I like them both. So.
Yeah, there is a book I read, The German Girl by Armando Lucas Correa, which was about, I'm going to forget the name of the ship, but a ship who brought a number of Jews over from Germany to Cuba. And Armando is a friend of mine who grew up in Cuba and then left when he was 18. He's like the editor of People magazine in Espanol. But it was like, I had no idea of this little story. I mean, it's not a little story, it's a big story, but this little snippet of history that I knew nothing about. Anyway.
Yeah. That stuff is, I feel like, why read about the past? I mean, there's so much happening now. Why read about the past? And I think it does a lot of things. I think it helps us connect to what is happening today. It helps us understand what is happening today. Because, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, you really, so you learn a lot and you're able to make a lot more connections that way. But I also think it helps to read things through a humanistic story. You can see that human nature hasn't changed all that much over time. If at all, really.
Well, and there's an old adage or so that history repeats itself.
It does. And I actually have a thought on that. I think it's because, like teenagers, we don't like to learn from other people. We have to make our own mistakes. And I find that sort of a doomed part of our our species is that we don't really like learning from other people. And that's really unfortunate. But sometimes it works. Sometimes we do learn and we move forward. So
I see that Sharon actually is asking a question I was going to ask. So thank you, Sharon. So Sharon asks, is there a time in history that you would like to write about that you haven't yet done so? And I my question was going to be, what's on your bucket list to write about? Like, what's the dream? Like, oh, I'd love to write about.
So many things. My favorite era really is sort of the Romantic period that overlaps with Victorian era, for those who are unfamiliar, up through the end of World War I. That's kind of my favorite time. Unfortunately, with publishing or any sort of, major business, you have to often choose topics that are going to sell over things that you would like to write. So I tend to sort of figure out where that sweet spot is. And sometimes the historical novels that are farther back in time are harder to sell. At least right now, the pendulum swings all the time and it changes. But so I would love to write more in the 1880s and 1890s. I love that time. You've got the Industrial Revolution. You've got the burgeoning women's rights movement. You've got the middle class is expanding. You have all these inventions. Art is going through this huge metamorphosis. There's so much happening. It's incredibly dynamic period, which I guess in the U.S. we'd call the Gilded Age and the Belle Époque. I find that probably is my very favorite. So I'm sure I will get back there at some point. But I'd also love to write a book about Beethoven. Like, I love Beethoven and I love tragedies. And I would love to write that book. I love music. But I got to tell you, writing a male perspective is hard in this industry right now. They don't want you women to write males from history unless there's another female perspective.
Does it flip? Do you think, Heather, that males can write? They're interested in males writing female?
I do.
Yeah, I think it's actually really interesting when that happens really well. It doesn't always happen really well, but when it does, it sort of stuns me.
Yeah.
But that's interesting that they don't. That they're not. I have to think about that. Of which.
It's hard to. It's just hard to sell. It doesn't mean that we aren't capable at all, of course.
Right.
It just means, and I wrote Rodin's Lover that has a perspective of Rodin and Camille Claudel. And then I wrote with Hazel Gaynor Last Christmas in Paris, and I wrote the male parts. And the book I just finished is a dual biographical that's coming out next winter. I can't say what yet, but set in the 50s and 60s in Hollywood, and it's a male perspective. But I have a female too. So it's like I kind of have to come at it sideways. So
is historical fiction a big seller at Bank Square Books, Annie? You were saying you enjoy reading that. Is it very popular?
Yes, no, very much so. I mean, a lot of book clubs use it. But yes, I mean, at both. Well, Title IX it's working its way, growing up a little bit. It's kind of my little
pet project.
Adolescent over here that I'm growing up. We're trying to grow it up. But yeah, no, it is definitely historical fiction. I mean, it's kind of, it's like someone asked me once a long time ago, it's like, how do you buy for Bank Square Books? Because we're such a tourist town in the summer and have such a strong, support from locals. And I said, you just have to buy a little bit stuff of everything. I mean, from
what sticks.
Yeah, from nonfiction to sci-fi to political, as you've seen, Heather, we have a number of sections of all of that. And sometimes it depends on, obviously, of who my staff is. And at the moment, they're sort of leaning a little bit towards sci-fi, fantasy, rom-com, queer lit, which is cool. I mean, that because they read it and they sell a ton of those books. I mean, you can watch the sci-fi just in the last 5 years really go up. I honestly don't read that. I never have, but so be it. But yeah, no, historical fiction is, it's just a solid, good read too for people like we talked about, of wanting to learn something and wanting to sort of disappear into someone else's world.
Yeah,
but not disappear so far that you're in a dystopian world that makes it, I can't follow. But yeah, yes, we do.
What books are particularly popular right now at Bank Square, or what are you looking forward to? What would you hand sell if you were walking the floor and someone said to you? Obviously, you'd say The Next Ship Home, but after The Next Ship
I would say The Next Ship Home.
You've already read all of
That's such a hard question because I read so much in advance of all of that, of what is, that's just, but I will tell you, so at the moment I'm reading In Love by Amy Bloom, the memoir about taking her husband. I just started it and I read early in the morning. This is when I really read. And I just could not put it down. I just wanted to skip the whole snowy day and finish it. No one knows it's a memoir about her writing about her husband who had Alzheimer's and went to Switzerland to, put his life take his life, or however you want to say it, with dignity. And I've only read like 50 pages, but it's so good. And then I walk a lot, and so every Saturday morning I walk and I listen to the New York Times book review with Pamela Paul, and I was listening to this book in the Valley of Death. It's a nonfiction about a young man who disappeared in this valley in I think in Nepal. That a lot of other climber people have disappeared in.
Yeah.
And so that's on my list to read. So that I would hand sell. Narrative nonfiction is really good for people to sell as well. I like to read a lot of thrillers. That's sort of my brain candy. I just like when I finished judging for the National Book Award, all I could read were like thrillers. It's like just to cleanse my brain a little bit. And some were really good and some were not very good, but it really didn't matter. It was like, I just sort of devour those books. And I read one called The Harbor, which a lot of like Norwegian, Scandinavian, they're a little dark, but they're not, another one I really like for that is Camelia Lackberg. She's not a huge seller, and they're not really dark horror, but they're kind of like Louise Penny, that you follow the same family, the same detectives, the same thing. And there's a murder and that kind of stuff. But I'm trying to think. But anyway, we'll see.
So a lot of murder and a lot of death.
I don't read all murder. Murder and love. How's that for a dichotomy?
Heather, can you read fiction while you're writing?
Oh, I must. Absolutely.
You must read fiction while you're writing.
I know some people say they can't because they take on the voice, but I'm an editor. I'm a freelance editor too. I work with lots and lots of aspiring and published authors on their books. And I think I buy it to some degree, but you can cleanse sort of the voice out of your head and get to work. And they stand by it and that's fine, but I cannot imagine that would mean I would go months and months and months without reading. And I find really often there's this magical thing that happens where I'm kind of stuck on something, or I'm just sort of toiling through the middle of a book I'm writing, and I'll pick up some random book, even something that's been on my shelf for a long time that I've been meaning to get to, or an audiobook or whatever it is. And I just happen to pick the perfect thing that shows me what I need to do in my work in progress to fix it. It's amazing. It happens all the time. It's happened with every one of my books. It's happened multiple times with my books. And it's just, I think by reading others, you learn so much. And right. I have studied so much structure, book structure, a million different kinds of structure, that it's really helpful. I mean, it helps me a ton. So, and it's food,
that's a question that at a lot of events, people will ask authors, like, what's some advice you could give to aspiring authors? And it's like, just read.
Yeah, read as much as possible in every category.
If you write something and you read it, or you read it out loud to yourself, it's like, oh my God, that doesn't make any sense. Or that sentence is just you just stumble over that. And I see that in writing too. I mean, in reading and also some writing is like, wait a minute, what was that sentence again? And so anyway.
All the studies show that obviously reading and writing are very closely linked. And so the more that you read and the more that you write, the stronger your skills become, Right. And your brain sort of absorbs the language and how it's used. And there's a million good reasons to read. Never mind studying the market, watching the market.
What's on your bedside table right now, Heather? What are you reading?
Oh, about 3,700 books.
I know. It's like, I brought my little book that's like, what books am I reading? And twice I try to write them down. I got kind of lost during COVID, but I write them. I don't write reviews. I just write them down. So
actually, the one that I'm really sort of zipping through, Annie, since you're talking about thrillers, is Julie Clark, who wrote The Last Flight.
She's good. Your new one?
Her new one,
Mhm.
The Lies I Tell, I think is what it's called, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through that. And I've had some insomnia recently, off and on. I think it's just being a mother and in this world. And so I've been reading that in the middle of the night, and I find that that's probably a bad idea because then I don't want to go to sleep because I'm totally hooked on it. So that's been really fun.
Yeah.
And I just bought that book called Anatomy. That's the picture of the heart. Annie, I bought it at Bank Square, actually.
I haven't read that.
It's a YA book. You know what? I wish I could tell you the author, but it looks like it's a woman in this beautiful red and pink dress, and the dress is shaped to look like a heart.
I can see the cover, but I can't tell you what the book is.
I think it's a gothic, and it's young adult. I got it in the young adult section, but I was so drawn in by the cover, and I love gothic, so I thought, ooh, I'm going to do that. So that'll be my next one.
Yeah, I'm looking at my list. I mean, some of it is kind of dark, to be honest. I just read it. But
there's nothing wrong with dark. Dark's good. I mix it up though. I like to mix dark with lighter for sure.
Yeah, I read one called Annie Hartnett wrote.
Unlikely Animals.
Yeah, Unlikely Animals is her new one coming out, which is great. And she's in Boston, and she's just such a fun person too. She was such a big support of us with Savoy. So I read her new one.
I tried to quickly look up the book, Heather, you were describing, and I couldn't find it. So
I'm going to have to look it up. Yeah, I do a lot of audiobooks too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's called Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz.
Okay, great. And for those people who are interested in audiobooks, you can get them through Libro FM.
Which is great.
So we'll put a link below.
And that supports the independent bookstores.
Yes, so we get a very small percentage of them, but Mark Pearson, who started it, lives out west in Seattle and couldn't be a nicer person. And we do really well with those audiobooks through Libro, and I have them, and they're great. We have a place in Vermont, and I that's how I get to Vermont, is listening to audiobooks. I mean, it sort of changed the world in terms of driving.
Or cooking or cleaning. I have to paint my bathroom soon. I'm going to crank up a new audio.
Yep.
So Annie, we asked booksellers this question, and we asked you this last time. We always ask them, please finish the sentence for us. Running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else? And last time you were on the show, you said it was community, that the community was really important to serving the community was really important, and that was an integral part of what you do. You're thinking about it. I'm not sure. You're gonna keep that answer? Do you want to change?
I think that's definitely part of the answer for sure. But in thinking of a different answer that's more sort of personal, is what I've really noticed doing it for 16 years is launching young people sort of into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them come and work for me, like Kelsey April, who's the general. She came work for me when she was like 16, and she's a general manager. But watching them grow and being so invested in the bookstore and the book selling world, that it's a great sense that we're all in this together and doing something good for the world. And I have a number of booksellers who's work for us who are working at other bookstores around the country very successfully. And that just is nothing than just feeling good about they got their feet wet at Bank Square, Savoy, or Title IX, and we're ready to get out in the world. And I totally support that. You know, it's like if you want to get out of, if you grew up in Mystic and you don't want to live in Mystic the rest of your life and you want to go live in New York or San Francisco, I totally get it. So I guess that's the community. Takes my answer about community into the smaller word, the community of the actual bookstore and the family that we have. So.
And you do a lot outside of running your bookstores. You do a lot for book selling in general, serving on the different literary award panels, serving on boards. What is what do you get from that? What is your goal in taking your focus beyond your bookstores? What do you hope that you can bring to that process?
I mean, some of it is obviously personal for me, that it's really fun. I mean, I love to read and share that love of reading. I've always sort of said that, hand selling a book is like giving a gift from yourself to that person. It's like you're sharing part of yourself with that person. And I've learned a lot in the last 16 years. And if I can give back to people what I've learned to help them be successful in the book selling world, that's so satisfying to me. And being president of the Big Book Industry Charitable Foundation, that is just the best board I've ever been on, in the sense that it's a very small organization. During COVID, we raised so much money, and I never even thought, I don't like asking people for money, but somehow with Bing, it's not hard. And it's because you're helping booksellers who have a medical emergency, or they're being evicted, or a myriad of problems that we're helping them with. And, it just feels so good to take whatever I've learned through the years, with help of other people. I've learned a lot, and to share that back with the community, or book selling ecosystem. And some of it's been, helping people open bookstore. There's these two sisters who found me on Facebook somehow, and I'm not even a big Facebook person. It's just who were wanting to open a bookstore in Westminster, Pennsylvania, called the Rudolph Girls, and I met with them on Google Meet like 4 or 5 or 6 times. And I just got in touch with them the other day, and they had a great holiday season and are doing really well. And so that to me is just immensely satisfying. And also, like for Heather, is to bring authors into the world as best we can. That's what independent bookstores do so well, is to bring authors to, our customers and to an audience. And I really, it was really hard during COVID of not being able to do that. And we all, we're all Zoom exhausted for sure, but we're all looking forward to bringing that back, hopefully, knock on wood, and to, bring authors, into the world with their books.
Well, we can't wait either. I'll tell you.
I know.
Heather, you mentioned earlier that I know we're coming down to the end of our time, but I wanted to just loop back. You mentioned earlier that you have another book coming out next winter, and you cannot tell us about it. Can you give us a sense of when it's coming out in the winter so people can put a note on their calendar?
So I will say that my publisher asked me to write this book. So this is, and they're working on some stuff. So this is partially why I can't disclose much, but I will say that they're starting the cover wars in the next week. They've asked me for input on that. And they're looking at a winter release. So winter in the book world is between January and April, probably February. And like I said, 1950s and 60s Hollywood, dual biographical. So 2 true to life people that had an absolutely incredible, insane lifestyle. They were a riot to research, and yeah, so I'm excited to actually share that soon, hopefully. Actually, I find out today. I'm supposed to get on the phone with my agent here in a few minutes, and we're going to talk about it. So
we'll just tell people that we'll put the link to your newsletter below. So they should sign up for a newsletter so they can get the word directly from you when you're ready to share it. Thank you both so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us. And Annie, thank you so much for meeting with me.
Thank you. And thank you, Heather. And let's not let another year go by without meeting in person. You just have to nail me down.
I will find you.
They know how to find me. So I'm not very far away most of the time, but I would love it.
That'd be terrific.
So,
to our audience, if you liked today's show, and we hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook so you can get notified about all of our events, or hop over to our website, amightyblaze.com, to sign up for our weekly newsletter, which goes out every Monday and gives you the rundown of all of our interviews for the week. And please join us back here next week for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. Until then, be well and keep reading. Night.
Bye.
Night. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.